Good morning. Happy to be here in beautiful San Francisco. And of course, today we're here to talk about wine and distilled spirit agreements, generally supply. So I know we're talking about bulk and others, but we will expand upon that a little bit. So basically what we're talking about is creating a brand without a winery or distillery. You hear about virtual wineries, virtual distilleries, and people say, well, you know, they really don't exist. Well, that's really not true, because we're in a heavily regulated industry, and as such, you have to have licenses or permits in order to operate. So you have it on the federal level, and then you also have it on the state level. So if you're a producer or a manufacturer, you're going to have a federal basic permit. And depending if you're a winery or distillery, you're going to have a bonded winery license, it could be a bonded wine cellar license, tax-paid wine bottling house, or you can be a distilled spirits plant. And in some cases, you'll have a wholesaler license. On the state level, it depends what state you're working in. So each state will have a different license name or permit name. So it could be a winery, it could be farm winery, it could be, if you're selling grapes, you could be a wine grape, get a wine grape grower's permit. Distillery, of course, it could be a license, manufacturing permit, and then of course, the craft distillery licenses are very popular now because it's such a hot area. So now, when you're sourcing products, because essentially that's what you're doing when you have a virtual distillery or winery, there are benefits to both the producer and the supplier. So from the supplier side, if you're a supplier or manufacturer, well, if you are going to provide a product for a purchaser, well, that's fine because you already have a plant, you have equipment, you have the labor, right? So there's no added cost to you. You may be utilizing extra capacity that you have. You may have a production facility for 100,000 cases of wine, but maybe you're only utilizing 80%. So what do you do with that extra 20%? Why not sit there and use that capacity and help somebody else out? So this gives you an opportunity if you have any excess wine, so it's already produced, product that's in bulk, and then you're able to sell it off. So this generates additional income, you have additional margin, and then also what it does, it creates demand for your product or your services. So you may be an existing winery, and now you're known as a custom crush facility, so that's additional income for you. On the purchaser side, or if you're a brand owner, if I want to start my own company, say I want to start a product like Donna's Wine, well, it's a lower cost to entry if I don't have to go out there and purchase a vineyard, or a winery, the equipment, and have the labor force. So that's much easier to start up. It's also faster to market. If I purchased a winery and say I started my own plantings, it's going to take at least 3 years for me to generate produce and then start my wine business. So it's faster to market if I already purchased bulk wine or wines that are being processed by somebody else. There's a valuable branding opportunity because now here I am coming up with my own personal label, so that helps me if I'm a retailer or a restaurant. It's exclusive because if Steve owns a restaurant, he's not going to sell my wine, I'm going to sell Donna's wine. So there's exclusivity and there's a benefit to that. And also, of course, there's going to be increased profit because again, you're cutting out certain parts of the supply chain, so I can increase the profit for my own brand. And there are lower production minimums. If I go to somebody else or purchase a national brand, I may have to have larger volumes that I'm purchasing. If I'm just a small company starting out, I may have the benefit of working with a contract supplier and then get smaller volumes and then start my business, see how that's working out for me. And then lastly, there's some programming opportunities. If you're a restaurant and you want to come up with a program, say a wine flight tasting or spirits tasting, well, you have the opportunity to do so in-house. Again, so then you have that branding of your product, and then it'll encourage people to come back. And probably lastly, and most importantly for the consumers, they could be getting a fantastic wine. If I'm buying a bulk wine from a vineyard or a winery, that maybe it wasn't exactly to the quality standards that that winery wanted, I may be able to get that bulk wine at a very good price. So now I'm passing it along to the consumer, will get a valuable wine, great product, and a much cheaper cost. So there are several ways you can create a brand. And people often talk about private label, and they're not really sure what that means. Is it just that I put a label on the product? Or somebody's talking about a supply agreement. Again, there's a little confusion. But I'll talk about generally in these 4 big buckets. So private label, people think that's something that starts from soup to nuts, where you come up with a concept with one company, and it'll take you all the way through the concept through a finished product. Supply agreements is just that. You can contract with somebody to supply product for you, whether they're going to create it and produce it, or it could already be finished. Custom crush is when you're dealing with a winery and they can either purchase grapes for you, or you can source grapes, have them brought there, they'll crush that bottle, turn it into juice, and then bottle it for you. Or, and of course, bulk purchase. So again, you're getting that on the spot market, it's already completed. So now there are various service companies when you're looking to do this and to create your own brand and start up your virtual business. And they're names similar to what I was just talking about, those 4 topics. So you have supply companies. It could be wine, it could be distilled spirits. There's the bulk purchase. Again, we were talking about custom crush wineries. Grape purchase, obviously, you're purchasing grapes from a grower to start your wine business. And then you have co-packing, contract bottling, and private labeling. Again, they seem to be interchangeable terms, so I don't want there to be any confusion out there, because if you go online and you're looking to start up a business, you may see all different types of names up there and say, you know, what do they really do for me? But I think if you go through websites, you talk to people and speak to them, they'll be able to tell you what services they provide, because they're all a little bit different. So, this is the question I always get. Are agreements necessary? And what do you think I say as a lawyer? Of course. And it's not just to generate business. I really truly believe it's important to have contracts, because it really defines what you're agreeing to between 2 parties. So here's some of the reasons why. It outlines your key business terms. What are you engaging this person for? Or why are you working with this party? Secondly, it defines your roles and responsibilities. If I am a producer and someone comes to me and they want me to produce a spirit for them, well, I want to know what they want me to do, and also I want to know what they're going to do as well. Identifying the timing for certain actions. So if we're talking about harvest, well, when is that going to take place? Or if I'm going to be bottling, when's that going to take place? So it sets up the timing for your agreement, and it doesn't leave any room for interpretation. Goes to managing the parties' expectations as to what you're doing with the products and the type of performance. And then lastly, it sets forth a process for any remedies or resolution in case there's a dispute. You hope that's not the case, but unfortunately, sometimes that happens. So today I'm going to talk about some key terms that I think are important to discuss. And I don't want to bore you to death with them, because I can do that. But it's important when you're negotiating with a party, regardless of which side you're on, that you talk about certain terms. So this way, again, you're managing each other's expectations, right? Because sometimes people get into a situation where they're going to work with somebody and they get handed a contract. And they say, okay, just sign this. Well, you really just don't want to sign it, because you're not really sure what's in there. You want to go through the terms, really have an understanding of what you're getting and what you bargained for. So, defining parties seems straightforward. But you have representatives that may come to you and they say that they represent one company, but in fact they represent a whole bunch. You just want to make sure the party that you're talking to is represented and as the authority to actually enter into this agreement with you. So it's on the seller side and also the purchaser brand owner side. You want to define the product. So if I am creating a wine, or I'm creating my own vodka, well, what is it? What do I want? So again, you're going to define the type of product that you're looking for. You want to define the style and the characteristics. Do I want it to be a heavily oaky, buttery Chardonnay? Most people probably say no in this room. Or do I want a gin that is really heavy in juniper? Or do I want it to be flavored? But you just want to be very specific as to what you want. What kind of quality do I want? Do I want a basic red table wine? Or do I want a higher end, super premium product? Do I want it to be organic? If so, there are going to be certain steps to ensure that you are getting that type of quality. How much do I want to purchase? What's the quantity? And then when you get into your mash bill or your blend, when you're dealing with a spirit, what's the combination? What kind of mixture do I want for my grains? Or a blend if I'm looking for a Cabernet. Do I want to add in another grape for a different flavor? So now when you're dealing with grapes specifically, you want to get into the type of grape and the varietal that you're going to be working with. Are you going to be working with Pinot Noir? Or what kind of grape are you sourcing? And then are you dealing with a specific vineyard? If so, you want to note that. You also want to get into the location. Now, certain vineyards may have, their land could be in a valley, it could be on a hill. You may want grapes that are on the hillside because it may do something for the grapes. Maybe you're going to get a sweeter grape. Or if you're looking maybe for a Chardonnay, if you want it in the valley, you want cooler temperatures. Whatever that is, and again, this may get to different levels on the sophistication of the purchaser, but you want to specify that. Again, do you want it to be organic? What type of quality do you want when you're dealing with your sugars and your acid and your pH balance? So you're getting very specific, but because you're coming out with a product that you're not sure what it's going to be like, there's certain measurables that you can check to ensure you're getting what you want. What type of viticultural practices are there? Well, what type of pruning? What's the irrigation going to be like? What type of pesticides are being used or other chemicals on this product? And then last, the quantity. So like any other thing, whether you're sourcing grapes or coming up with a spirit, there's going to be a production and planning schedule, right? We don't just say, this is what I want, and it just pops out the other end. It's not like the Jetsons, we have a little pill and you add some water. So when you're dealing with supply agreements, generally there's going to be a forecast because you want to know what's coming in, what the timing is going to be, because again, if you are a purchaser, you're not the only customer of a producer. And if you're a producer manufacturer, again, you need to fulfill the needs of your customers and make sure you do so timely. So you're going to have a nice production schedule. So that could be dictated by a forecast or your production estimate. And then also there's going to be a removal schedule. Once the product is produced, what do? You want your client to actually take that product and move it out. So you want to communicate as to the timing for that. When you're dealing with bottling requirements or bottling agreements, if I'm a bottler and I have a customer that comes to me and says, okay, I'd like you to produce this for me, bottle it, I'm purchasing bulk product from one entity and then I want you to bottle it, well, there's going to have to be a plan, right? So it could be an annual plan, it could be a multi-year plan, but you want to know the schedule. Because you're going to have bulk purchase coming in, well then how do you time that? You want to make sure you have bottles, you have the bottling line ready, and you also have the product in which to put in those bottles. If you're dealing with grape purchase, harvest comes into play, right? Mother Nature, you're not really sure when those grapes are going to be ready, but you want to have an idea. Are you dealing with hand harvesting? Are you dealing with machines? The grape maturity, well, you're going to try and estimate when that's going to be, and then when you're going to harvest and when that delivery is going to take place. You're going to have that window. And so you want to know prior notice, the timing and when that's going to happen, so everybody can be ready and then produce what they need to produce. So pricing, pretty straightforward. You're going to deal with a schedule or a list, depending on the type of service. Generally, I like to include that into your agreement. And you want to know what the basic cost of the service is going to be, and then if there are going to be any variables. It could be based upon the forecast of what you're producing. It could be based upon a variance of, say, there are more grapes or less grapes. Is that going to affect your pricing? And there could be additional charges. What people don't understand is some agreements, they think if they're contracting with somebody that everything is paid for one price, and oftentimes they're surprised that they find out that, oh, I have to supply the bottles, or I didn't know I had to pay for the yeast, for the ingredients or the packaging or the labeling. So again, it's really just a matter of clear communication between the parties to make sure that they know who's responsible for what. And then also warehousing. Now that you produced all this product and you thought you were going to have these great sales because you came out with a new brand, like I have the best wine out there, it's going to be flying off the shelves. Well, that doesn't always happen. So now, if I thought certain retailers were going to take my product and I didn't get those orders, what happens with now all this product or inventory that I have? Well, I may have to find myself in a warehousing situation. Can I work with my producer to warehouse the product until I'm ready, or if it has to be staged? And then lastly, frequency of price changes. So you may have in your agreement a schedule for what the prices are for the services. But if it's a multi-year agreement, how often can that person or the producer change the pricing? Well, if I'm a producer and labor costs go up, or there's a surcharge for gas, or oil prices go up, or the cost of grapes, depending what services I'm providing, I may want to increase those charges and pass them down to my customer. How often can I do that? Well, I may want to do it when I feel the need, but if I'm a purchaser, I don't want the producer to be able to hike prices up just because. So you want to set forth a timing for that. Maybe it's once a year, maybe it's upon 6 months' notice, whatever it is, but just to be cognizant of that process. So now with grapes, generally people purchase it a couple of ways. Am I purchasing grapes if I'm dealing directly with a grower? Am I doing it based upon tonnage? So it could be a set price for a certain amount of tons. Or am I doing it on an acreage cost? So I could say there's an 100-acre farm, and then I want to produce from these 10 acres. And it doesn't matter what the volume comes out to be or the weight at the end of the day, I contracted just for whatever the yield is from this particular plot. Sometimes you can do a combination. So you may have an acreage agreement, but if for whatever reason, if there's drought, there's some infestation, something goes wrong, then it can convert into a tonnage agreement and it'll be based upon a certain price. Now, when you're dealing with grapes, there are certain variables that may come into play. And you may have a great yield, and you may have more grapes than you anticipated, or when it's produced, it's more juice than you wanted. Well, what happens with that excess fruit or that excess production? You may want to talk with the producer or the purchaser, whoever, to say who actually benefits from that. And also, if there's any quality issues or defect or rot, how does that affect your pricing? Payment terms. Again, you always want to know what you're paying, how much, where, when they're going to be made. So you could have a specific date when a payment is going to be made. If I use a grape example, you sit there, am I paying upon delivery? Am I paying you X amount after harvest? Maybe it's 100%. Or is there going to be some type of combination? Maybe I pay 50% 30 days before the harvest, and then maybe I do that 30% by the end of the year. Whatever it is, you just want to be clear as to what your payment terms are going to be. Roles and responsibilities. I spoke about this earlier on in the beginning. Again, this is probably the most critical part, just having an understanding of who is doing what when you're creating this new brand and this new product. There are going to be certain standards and specifications that you want, right? If you're producing a wine, or you're producing a vodka or a bourbon, there are standards and specifications that you want to set forth and communicate clearly. If you're sourcing grapes or you're identifying growers, who's going to do that? You can work with a winery, a custom crush facility, and they may say, okay, we have access to plenty of grapes and we'll source them for you. Or you can turn around and say, all right, we don't have access to grapes, or if you want your own grapes or grape growers, we'll work with you. But again, just to be clear, you want to know who's responsible for what. When you're getting into working and producing a product, you want to know who has authority to test that product or the wine or the spirit. So who's actually in control? If you're dealing with a winery, oftentimes they have a winery on premises, so they could sit there and they may be the ones in charge. They may say, okay, the grapes are ready, so we're going to harvest them, or this is what we're doing to produce the wine. Other times, you as the brand owner may say, you know what, I have a winemaker, my cousin's a winemaker, I want somebody that I know to test it or tell me when the grapes are ready. And that's fine. It's just being clear as to who actually has control over the process. Or if you're dealing with a distiller who's making a gin for you, again, is that person the one saying, okay, the qualities are correct? That may not be what you want, but you may disagree, so you want to, again, know who has ultimate control. Obtaining, filing regulatory approvals and reports, generally that's something that the producers will be taking care of, but again, you want to be clear as to what reports they'll be filing. Arranging for your product transportation and delivery. If you're dealing with grapes, are you responsible for getting that delivery? If you are delivering to somebody else who's going to arrange and take care of it, again, just laying that out for you. Test and analysis. Again, people who are in the production or manufacturing side of it will have people generally on staff or people that they use. Are they going to be conducting the test or analyzing the products through the various stages, or is that something that you want as the brand owner to control? Designing labels and packaging. Again, we were saying at the beginning that some private label companies will take care of everything from concept to the finished product. So in such case, they would deal with designing your labels or helping you out with your packaging or maybe even marketing materials. So you want, again, just define who is going to be responsible. And if not, then obviously you would have to outsource that. And then one thing that people don't always consider is filing for intellectual property protection. So if I go to a company and say, I want to create a vodka, and they create a label for me, I'm happy with the taste profile, they bottle it, everything's beautiful, and it ships out. Unfortunately, sometimes brand owners think, well, they're taking care of trademarks, and that's not the case. So again, you just want to be clear if that's your understanding or if that's what you think you heard, just clarify it, because maybe they have somebody, maybe they have an attorney on staff or that can file for you, but it's really best to make sure, because one thing that I find, and I get this a lot of times with clients, they'll come to me after the fact. They have a beautiful product, they have it out in the marketplace, they are about to sell it, start launching it, or they're already started, and then I ask them, did you register this? Did you get a trademark? And they'll say, no, we didn't do that. And I do a search, and then I find out, well, there's another name that's competing with their name or beats them to the punch that they had the prior filing, and that's not a good thing, because now you've wasted your time, money, and effort for a product that someone's going to send you a cease and desist letter. So it's a good thing, again, just to make sure who's responsible for what, but that's just something to be concerned about. Testing and analysis. Again, getting back into your sampling procedures and the analysis. Sometimes what will happen, if you are purchasing bulk wine, you'll get a sample of the product that you say, okay, this is what I want. And then when it's delivered to you, you want to test the quality of it. Or you are producing that vodka or gin, and you say, I like this type style, and I want you to produce a product that has the same profile. Well, you want to test it at some point. Who is going to be responsible for testing it? It could be the distiller that's actually making it for you, and you may agree to those terms, or you may want your own test done, whether it's by somebody you know or to an outside lab. If you're going to do that, you want to make sure that you understand what the timing is. So if I'm a producer and I give you a sample and say, here's the gin, and you say, great, and you take that sample, and then you go on vacation, you're hanging out with friends, and you're trying it, but you don't actually test it, probably not a good thing, because at some point they're going to say, well, you accepted the sample. So you just want to make sure what the timing is going to be, so this way you can say, I approve of the sample, and then we can go on and either accept the order of the bulk or the final product you're approving for bottling. So again, getting into whether you accept, reject, or you have to correct it, you just want to understand what those terms are going to be and the timing for it. Transportation and delivery, again, trying to understand who's responsible for what, who's arranging for the delivery, the method and handling, the packaging. You can work with somebody and say, okay, I'd like you to produce or supply me with this type of product, but now how is it going to be delivered? The producer may think they're delivering it in bulk. I may think that it's being bottled. So you just want to be clear as what that delivery method is going to look like. You want to set a delivery date or window. Again, if you're dealing with the harvest for grapes, when are they going to be delivered? And then always remember, you have to define where it's going to be delivered. And when you're talking about delivery, you want to be very clear, because sometimes people will give the name of a winery and say, okay, I'd like you to deliver the grapes here, but it's actually the office address. So that's not where it's going to be processed. You want to make sure you're giving delivery for the actual proper location. If you are going to have product delivered to you in bulk and it's going to be put into a tanker, some purchasers may not realize that there needs to be a certificate that the tank has been washed or sanitized. So there are certain documents that you just want to make sure, whatever it's going to be, that you know what has to be delivered when and what stage of the process. Now, when somebody produces a product for you, they actually have title to that product. So if I'm a manufacturer, I own that product until the title transfers to the purchaser. So you just want to define when that's going to be. It could be, I say, the product's finished, here you go, it's yours now. But there really has to be a defined time as to when that actually takes place, because it's important for your risk of loss. And when I mean risk of loss, that's talking about if I deliver a product and say I give it to Steve. Steve asked me to produce some grapes for him. So now I produce this wine, and I said, Steve, okay, delivery's ready. You can pick it up at my warehouse at any time. Well, Steve's like, oh, I'm on vacation, I'll come back and I'll pick it up in a couple of weeks. And then it turns out to be 2 months later because he really enjoyed himself in Europe and didn't come back for a while. And by the time he did, it was sitting in a warehouse that wasn't cooled properly, it wasn't temperature controlled, and now it's spoiled. Well, Steve may come back and say, Donna, I can't believe you gave me a product that's not good. I'll say, well, Steve, I delivered it to you. And it's like, no, you didn't. And I said, yes, I did. So you want to make sure it's clear as to when that title transfers, because if it's my fault and I didn't properly notify him when the title was going to take place, well, then it's going to fall on me and my insurance company is going to have to pay for that. If Steve was supposed to pick it up and he just never did because he was enjoying himself in Europe, well, then it's Steve's problem and his insurance will kick him. And that also gets into determining your insurance requirements. So term, pretty straightforward. How long is your agreement going to be? You can be purchasing in bulk and maybe it's a one-time deal. If you're going into a grape purchase agreement, maybe you're going to deal for 1 year or one harvest, or it could be a multi-year agreement. If so, that's fine. But then you may have an agreement where you want to go into renewal terms. So you can say, well, you know what, we're not going to have any renewal terms. Whenever it ends, it ends. You can give an extension where you say, okay, you know what, let's renew it for another year or so. Or you can have what's called an evergreen agreement, which means that it constantly rolls over for whatever term that you have until one party notifies the other. Termination, you want to be able to understand when you can terminate your agreement. So you may have a set expiration. If you have the evergreen, you give the proper notice as to when it ends. Or there can be a basis for early termination, such as breach, financial issues, maybe there's a bankruptcy, a change in control of the owners of either entity, a loss of license, obviously, again, being heavily regulated. If you don't have a license, you can't produce. So therefore, that's not going to work out for you. Or you can choose to terminate based upon convenience. If you decide that you don't want to work together anymore and everything's fine, you mutually agree as to timing, and then you're done. So I apologize. I'm going to zip through these very quickly because I'm running out of time. Confidentiality and intellectual property, important topics to consider. Confidentiality, you want to make sure that people don't have access to your trade secrets, formula, product composition, or marketing plans, whatever you discuss with whomever you are working with, whether you're the producer or the purchaser. If so, you can have a provision in there for liquidated damages to try to discourage anybody from breaching the confidentiality provision. Intellectual property, again, you can give a limited non-exclusive royalty-free license to somebody to use your trademarks. And also, if I am a producer, I am going to need the authority from the brand owner to use their name as a trade name on my license because I'm producing the product for them. And then also, if I'm a vineyard and I'm selling you bulk product and it's one of my high-end wines that maybe didn't meet the quality standards that I normally apply to it, I don't want you marketing as a purchaser of that bulk using my vineyard or my winemaker's name or anything related to my trademarks, because again, then you'd be trading on the goodwill of my product. A couple of remedies available for non-payment. You can file a lien, you can file get a security interest, or under the federal guidelines, there is a claim that you could file under the Perishable Agricultural Commodities Act called PACA that is related to the industry for produce. I'm zipping through these very quickly, sorry. Limitation of damages and waivers of warranties. If, as a producer, you don't want your damages to be crazy, right? So you want to try and limit them as much as possible. Mostly you try to limit that to your contract price, or if the buyer isn't in agreement with that, you may try to limit your insurance limits. And then in waiver implied warranties, I think some people make a mistake of saying, I guarantee your product will taste like X or look like X. And that opens you up for a lot of liability. So what's good to do is actually to waive your implied warranties, and you have to explicitly disclaim them. Otherwise, under a court of law, they can be considered in place. Lastly, dispute resolution. There are 3 major ways you can resolve any disagreement when you're banging heads, like my little picture here. So mediation, arbitration, litigation. I would say most people actually choose arbitration. Litigation is usually the most costly and most expensive. But again, I apologize for quickly running through the last bit of it, but hopefully you understand when you're working with whomever you are to contract bottle or to purchase in bulk or to create a brand for yourself, you have some ideas of the things to discuss with them, so this way you have a clear understanding of what you're purchasing or selling. So thank you very much.